Carlos, this is a personal story. Obviously, you're diving into your own life and your mom's life. Tell me about the writing process of creating this story and reflecting back on that time, and what does this mean to you, and how do you keep it as part of your own story, but also differentiate it and was able to make it, I think, a story that a lot of us can get, a wealth of knowledge from watching her.
Yeah, so I originally conceived of this project as a feature, and so what you saw was a proof of concept of what would be the first 3 seasons of the show Chiqui, but originally it was supposed to be a feature, but when we were developing it, we decided that it would do more justice to not only my parents' story, but this particular story of Colombian immigrants of that era, to have it be as a television series, because then we could really dive in and probe all of the nuances and all of the themes that we want to explore with this show. And in terms of the writing process, I grew up with my mother really being the narrator of my parents' immigration story. So I was always really fascinated by the way she would tell these stories, because my mother's a really funny person, as seen in the film. She's a very unique and vibrant personality. And on top of that, I had a trove of family photographs from that era. All of course was shot on film, because that's what it was back in the 80s and in the 70s. So I would listen to her tell me these stories, and I would look at these photographs, and I would just became so obsessed with that time period, because it just seems so distant and so mythical. I think by virtue of it being celluloid, by it being film, there was just a ghostly but beautiful and nostalgic quality to this photographs. On top of that, I am a byproduct of my mother's musical tastes. So I would listen to her music, which consisted of like Cyndi Lauper and Madonna and Starship and all of like the really bad pop. Actually, let me phrase that. All of the great pop music of the 80s. But of course, if you're a music person, you would maybe have a little bit of differing opinions on Cyndi Lauper. But anyway, I digress. But yeah, so just, all of this, I've always had this in the back of my head as a kid, and as a filmmaker, starting to make more personal content, which is the last 6 years of my career has been geared more towards autobiographical, what I call autofiction work. And so Chiqui is an extension of this new sort of thing that I'm exploring in my filmmaking career.
Can you talk about capturing the 70s and 80s? I mean, this goes into the later 80s. Fashion-wise, clothing choices, costume design in this film was wonderful. But like you said, the sound quality, and not only just the choice of music, but the composition, I think, has a beat to it that flows, I think, with her. I'm curious, can you share with us about creating that side of the film?
Yeah, so I worked really closely with my cinematographer, Rand Rosenberg. I'm also a cinematographer myself, so I'm very sensitive to the needs and what you have to have in order to achieve a particular look. And for this particular film, it being taking place in 1987, it was really important for us to not only capture the essence of it through the wardrobe and through the production design, through the various little trinkets and props and products, but also, of course, the hairstyles and the clothing choices. My production designer, Anna Novovich, is an extremely talented production designer and art director and set designer, and she was just very, very resourceful with the budget that we had, because this is a completely independent film. It was completely self-financed by myself, and so we had very limited money to create this period, but we were able to be resourceful because of during the time when we shot it, it was late 2020. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. A lot of the prop houses in New York where we shot the film were closing down, so there was a sort of what could I say, a lot of these places were closing down, and everything was sort of up for grabs. So we were able to get a lot of the stuff at a discounted rate, and it also helped that a lot of the locations that we shot were already sort of stuck in the 80s or the early 90s or whatever, or that specific era of time. That it was really just a matter of placing certain things or like putting in certain props of that era. So it wasn't that much of a stretch, but it was a stretch trying to get all of it together during the pandemic. And our costume designer Stina Dahlman was very resourceful in going thrifting, and was able to find these particular pieces that already lived in, because there's a lot of sometimes you see period pieces of a certain era that the clothes perhaps look a little too new, or they just don't have that lived in feeling. But our costume designer, Stina Dahlman, was able to find these clothes that were very, very much of that period, that were literally the same exact clothes that my parents wore when they first came here in 1987. So they had a pictorial reference of them from the photographs that I was just mentioning that I would lovingly stare at. And so they were very resourceful, and were able to find these things that were very much made or were part of the tapestry of Chiqui. And then of course shooting on 16 millimeter was extremely important. That was imperative for us. And so we shot on 16 millimeter. We shot on 500T, which was a film stock that was introduced in, I believe, in the 70s and actually in the 80s. So it was a faster film stock because a lot of independent productions were using this film stock because it was able to capture images under low light. And so it was, and also the graininess and the texture of it was very much in the spirit of independent films of the 1980s. And so and we shot on like the the Zeiss Super Speeds, the Mark IIs, which were the ones that were used in the 80s for filmmaking, for independent films that were shot on 60 millimeters. So we put all of these elements together to create that look. And it was also very important for us to not make the 1980s be something that was too much in the foreground of the film, because there's a lot of period pieces that are made that are contemporary that always sort of make sure that that they're in the 1980s, and they wink at you just to make sure. And of course we did that with our film, but I feel like it was a little more subtle. The 1980s were definitely a character, but it was more in the background, and in the foreground were the characters and their interpersonal story.
How'd you find your Chiqui?
So Chiqui, played by Bridget Silva, was a friend of mine that we had worked at a restaurant together many years ago, and she had just come from Colombia and was trying to break into the American cinema acting industry, and she didn't know how to speak English at the time, and she found a lot of refuge, if you will, in the fact that I was Spanish speaking, that my parents were Colombian, and that I could speak very fluently Colombian Spanish, and she thought it was just very endearing that I didn't have a gringo accent, or I didn't have an accent, and so we would just joke around, and there was all these. So the Spanish that I know that I'm fluent in is my mother's Spanish. Growing up, I spoke with my mother exclusively in Spanish, so I picked up a lot of her regionalisms and her colloquialisms and her sayings, and so Bridget would always find it so funny that I would say these things. She's like, "You sound like my grandmother. You sound like my mom. Like, it's so funny." And so we would just just back and forth joke around about that. And then we always wanted to make a project together. So many years down the line, when I was developing Chiqui, I was like, I literally wrote it because I knew Bridget could play this role, because Bridget reminded me so much of my mother. Bridget's in Chiqui, and also in her real life, she's a very funny and witty kind of character and personality. So I always was like, yeah, there's something, I think that Bridget could play my mother. I think she's the only person that could play my mother. And so when I introduced her the idea of Chiqui, she was like, yes, let's do it. And she also was fortunate. I was also very fortunate that she introduced me to Sebastian Beltran, who plays Carlos, and Catherine French, who plays Judy, because like I said, this film was completely self-financed, so I didn't have the resources or the money for a casting director. But I was very fortunate that Bridget was very steeped in the Colombian acting community, and that she introduced me to this wonderful talent that I wouldn't have had access to if I didn't know Bridget, or if I didn't have that point of reference.
Can you share with us, I don't want you to reveal too much, but the journey that we're going to see with Chiqui along the way, Where will it go? What are the highlights you're hoping to touch upon in her life, and how that rule, I'm guessing, will reflect in the time differences and changes over time?
For sure. So the first season of Chiqui is about their journey from Newark, New Jersey to Montauk, the Hamptons, and it probes the first couple of years in their life when they're cultivating their own version of the American dream, how they struggle with language and assimilation versus adaptation, how they ingratiate themselves in the tapestry of the Hamptons, which at the time was not really inviting towards immigrants, even though immigrants upheld a lot of the economy of the Hamptons by working as people in the construction or home maintenance industry and the hotel and a resort industry in the Hamptons. So it touches upon that, and also the inner conflicts in the Latin American community of that era. Touches upon a lot of colorism and internalized racism within the Latin American community, within Colombians and Mexicans and Ecuadorians and a lot of the Latin American and Central American people that comprised the community of the Latin American community in the Hamptons. But it also oscillates between the present, which is the 1987, and the present of Chiqui, and also it goes back to Chiqui's childhood in the 1950s and the 1960s when she was coming of age, and shows certain experiences that she had that made her very wary of men and made her an introverted feminist of her time. Also probes Carlos's upbringing as a middle-class Colombian boy, and his struggles with identity and his struggles with certain parts of his personality that are prominent in the first season of Chiqui. And then the second season flashes forward 15 years later. Chiqui and Carlos have carved out their little version of the American dream. They're homeowners, they're business owners, but they're on the brink of divorce, and their child, their only child, is a punk rock skateboarder rebel who's also figuring out his own placement in America and in American society with an identity and who he wants to be and how he wants to express himself as an American.
Carlos, if you don't mind, maybe this is a broader subject than just your film, but talking about the difference in the Spanish, you touched upon the difference in skin color of the South American countries is a huge, not issue, but it's definitely causes difference and variance and fighting even, and a lot of the way people are treated, and it impacts how people view people. Showcasing that to different audiences, is that a goal? Is that a set thing to want to showcase that there's a big difference between a Colombian person and a Brazilian, but there's also a difference in just the type of Colombians that are in Colombia compared to themselves, and how that's not something that especially in America, people don't take the time to understand that the cultures are vastly different. The Spanish is different, the food, the look of the people themselves. Is that something you're looking to touch upon in this series along the way, and showcasing that as well?
Absolutely. In Chiqui, the series, we definitely touch upon colorism, on internalized racism, on classism, which are really big topics in Latin American society back then in the 1980s and even before, and even now. There's what it means. It's also a similar existential question of what it means to be American. Who are we as Americans? That question of American identity is quite frankly, in my opinion, way more broad and way more extensive, because we are such a melting pot here in the United States. But also in Colombia and a lot of Latin American countries, we are byproducts of colonialism. We are byproducts of the deracination of indigenous people in South America. And so what it means to be Colombian is a very contentious question and issue, because we, like, Colombian people are very diverse, and they have a lot of layers of culture and of lineage, and so and there is this problem and this struggle of wanting to assimilate to white European culture, very much things that I struggle with as an American, wanting to be white, not wanting to be American, not wanting to distance myself from my culture, and same thing with Colombians. There's a lot of classism and a lot of colorism that a lot of Colombians don't want to deal with or don't want to have that conversation, especially amongst the older generations, the generation that I'm portraying in Chiqui. And so it will be a conversation. It will be a point and a thematic point in the series.
I'm curious, earlier you mentioned Chiqui's internal feminism, her ability to figure out who she is outside of obviously a masculine world that we live in. That's so apparent in who her personality is in just this short that I got to see. How can you share with us how powerful it is to have a strong woman in your life and how that has bled into your writing, I believe, and why that's important?
Yeah, so my mother came of age during a time where being autonomous or having an autonomous sense of self, having a sense of independence was something that was not very common amongst Colombian women. My mother was a flight attendant. She had managed to secure a spot as a flight attendant in Avianca. For someone of her socioeconomic standing, that was just unheard of. It was unprecedented. And so for her to be in charge of her life in the sense of having financial independence, in having her own career, being in charge of her career, having her own apartment, having her own car, having her own these material objects that were not common for Latin American women to have outside of marriage, outside of being taken care of by either a family or a man. So it was a big issue for my father's family, who struggled with this Chiqui being this independent person, and that we touch upon that in the series. But yeah, so my mother raised me with this idea that women should be respected, but in a way more militant way than most most mothers will do. Of course, I can't speak for everyone, but a lot of people, of course, their mothers are like, you should respect your mother, you should respect women, et cetera, et cetera. But my mother was very extremely militant about it, and in her own way. My mother was not college educated. My mother had no conception of any kind of feminist theory or literature, but she was very much, I guess, an inadvertent feminist just by who she was and her wariness of men that came from trauma she experienced when she was a child. And so her feminist education came from men just being horrible to her and abusing her in many different ways. And so it came from that. And so I think I just I don't want to take up too much space in terms of portraying strong female characters or Latin American women in cinema, but I think I have never seen, or I've very seldomly seen, Latin American or Spanish-speaking women have the ability to be a character in a film or a television series where they're able to be complicated, where they're able to be complex and three-dimensional, and have the audience question how much they empathize with her, how much they like her, or how much they're that's something I want to see. I want to see women be not anti-heroes, but be complex in film and television that are not, either like CEOs of a company or assassins or something like that. They're just regular people that are very multi-layered, and I haven't seen that, and so that's why I made Chiqui.
I love that you mentioned assassins, because there are like 45 shows. What does it mean then to have been accepted into Bentonville, knowing the mission statement for Gina and Wendy and that team, but also knowing that the diversity goes across the board? It doesn't have to necessarily just be one view of diversity. It can be so many. How did you take getting accepted to Bentonville?
I feel very privileged and honored to be able to be accepted to a very women-centric film festival like Bentonville. And Gina Davis is, one of my film and actor heroes, and she's, a very, she's an icon. And so to be a part of this festival is amazing. And I'm just glad that I could add to the dialogue in my own way. And so yeah, I just hope that Gina and Bentonville, that their mission and everything keeps going forward. And I'm glad to be a part of this section of it.
I'm curious, you mentioned earlier that you've made a conscious effort to change what you're working on now, to make it not autobiographical, but in that realm. Do you mind if I ask what personally changed in you to do this? And also with your previous work, creating what it is today, what you're doing, how did your previous work impact the type of filmmaker you are now?
Yeah, so I came of age when I went to film school. What was the most popular film at the time was No Country for Old Men. And I went to the New York Film Academy, which is a school that is more of a trade and craft school. So there wasn't the emphasis on film theory and film history wasn't as in the foreground as learning the technical side of it. So I started watching film in my own way. I was my own film theorist or film history teacher, and so I started off watching Hollywood cinema, and so I remember I watched all of the Academy Award winning films starting from 1927 to 2008, and so that was my education in film, and a lot of in terms of film theory and film criticism I learned from like Roger Ebert and the popular film critics of the time. And so I didn't have a very strong grip on like the breadth of film history. So I wanted to make the films that I liked and that I was inspired by. And at the time, it was genre, and it was like film noir, it was westerns, it was very, very, very specifically American stories. And that had nothing to do with being Latino, had nothing to do with identity or race or class or anything. They were just, I wanted to make No Country for, I want to make neo-noirs. And so I focused a lot of my early career as a director trying to do that. And it wasn't until later in my mid-20s when I met my producer Sophia Debon, who is went to school for gender studies and women's studies, that she sort of exposed me to feminist and critical race theory. That I was like, oh wow, like these were such liminal things that I had in the back of my head. I've always thought about making or expressing things that I felt that when I grew up that I felt were important to say, but I just didn't think that it was it just wasn't not a possibility. It just wasn't something that I was thinking of. And it wasn't until then that I realized, the more personal, the better. And I started watching films that dealt with this kind of stuff. And I was like, yes, I should try this. And my second feature is called Scenes from a Breakup, and it's literally about myself and making my first feature, which is a crime thriller and sort of interpersonal things in my life that I found a lot of joy and catharsis doing. And Chiqui is an extension of that. And I think that's what I've been most successful in making films about either myself or people that I know.
You've shared with us that kind of the Bible of where Chiqui will go. As you, as a writer, as a director, what are some of the other things you're looking to do? Is there anything you can share with us as far as what's next in the next few steps? Even you may not be able to share certain things, but even where Chiqui will go from here.
Yeah, so as of now, we're riding the traction of our film festival ride so far. We had our world premiere at Sundance, which opened up a lot of doors for us. We've been able to screen at festivals like at the Atlanta Film Festival, at Los Angeles Latino Film Festival, here in Bentonville. So we're just riding that wave and riding that traction, and we're trying to get Chiqui made into a series. Outside of that, I have a few other projects, features that I'm developing that are very much in the vein of Chiqui, that are autobiographical and also autofiction, or they're about people or circumstances that I'm very familiar with.
Very nice. Carlos, thank you so much for the time. Thank you for making a bold movie. And I love the adventure you're going on now. I think it's going to open so many eyes, just what you're able to create for us. So thank you, and I can't wait to see what's down the line.
Thank you for having me.